My name is Marlene, and I'm 63 years old. 5 years ago, I became a widow, and I thought I'd figured out how to navigate this new chapter of my life. When my daughter Sarah married Dylan 2 years ago, I was thrilled to welcome him into our family. He seemed charming, ambitious, and most importantly, he made my daughter happy. Last week, I was getting ready for Dylan's 32nd birthday dinner at the Golden Oak, one of the nicest restaurants in town. I was excited, proud even to be invited to such an exclusive celebration. But I had no idea that the expensive gift I'd carefully chosen for him would become the reason he decided to humiliate me in front of everyone. Before I tell you what happened next, where are you watching from today? Please hit that like button and subscribe, because you're about to hear how this man learned the most expensive lesson of his life. Let me paint you the full picture of our family dynamics so you understand exactly what led to this moment. After my husband passed away 5 years ago, I threw myself into my real estate career and managed to build a comfortable life from the insurance money and my business success. I've always been independent, but losing the love of my life taught me to rely on myself in ways I never imagined. Sarah, my only daughter, is 29 years old and works as an elementary school teacher at the local elementary school. She's always been the light of my life, sweet, caring, and maybe sometimes a little too trusting for her own good. She has this beautiful way of seeing the best in everyone, which I've always admired but sometimes worried about. When Dylan entered our lives 3 years ago, I genuinely liked him at first. He was 30 at the time, worked at some tech startup downtown, always talking about innovation and disrupting traditional industries. He seemed confident, successful, and most importantly, he treated Sarah with what appeared to be genuine love and respect. At least that's what I thought during those early months. But over time, I started noticing small comments here and there. Nothing overtly rude, but always with this underlying tone that suggested I was some lonely old woman who didn't understand the modern world. There was the time he explained cryptocurrency to me like I was a complete beginner, even though I handle complex real estate investments and financial transactions daily. Or when he suggested I should embrace technology more because I preferred phone calls over text messages for important conversations. Sarah would always laugh these moments off when I mentioned them. "Mom, he's just trying to help. He doesn't mean anything condescending by it. That's just how his generation communicates." But the real turning point came 6 months ago, when Dylan and Sarah approached me with what they called a business proposal. They had found their dream house, this gorgeous colonial-style home, in one of the nicer suburbs, complete with a 2-car garage, beautiful landscaping, and everything a young couple could want. The problem was, they were significantly short on the down payment needed to secure the mortgage. Dylan came prepared with charts, graphs, and market analysis, presenting their request like some kind of investor pitch. He talked about property appreciation rates, neighborhood development plans, and projected return on investment. He made it sound like I would be doing myself a favor by lending them the money they needed. The amount they requested was $250,000. That represented nearly half of my liquid savings money I had worked incredibly hard to accumulate through years of successful real estate deals and careful financial planning. But seeing Sarah's face light up when they showed me pictures of the house, watching her describe where they would put their future children's bedrooms, made the decision feel obvious. I agreed to lend them the full amount with no interest charges and no formal contract, just a handshake agreement between family members. Dylan promised they would start making regular payments within a few months, once his startup reached some crucial milestone he was always talking about. Sarah hugged me with tears in her eyes, telling me I was making their dreams come true. 6 months passed without a single payment. Every time I gently brought up the subject, Dylan had a perfectly reasonable explanation. The investors were being more demanding than expected. The market conditions were challenging their growth projections. They were in the middle of a critical funding round that required all available cash flow to be reinvested in the business. Sarah would always look uncomfortable during these conversations, but she consistently supported her husband's explanations. Mom, you know we're good for the money. Dylan is working 18-hour days to build something really special. Once things stabilize, we'll start paying you back regularly. Then, last Monday, something unexpected happened. Dylan sent me a text message that actually caught me off guard in the best possible way. He was inviting me to his birthday celebration at the Golden Oak, describing it as an exclusive dinner with our closest family and friends. The fact that he considered me close enough to include me in such an intimate gathering made me feel genuinely touched. Maybe all those small tensions I'd been sensing were just misunderstandings after all. I spent the entire week preparing for this dinner with more enthusiasm than I'd felt about a social event in months. I wanted to show Dylan that despite any minor misunderstandings we might have had, I truly supported him and valued our relationship as family. This felt like an opportunity to strengthen our bond and move forward on better footing. My first stop was Nordstrom, where I spent considerable time selecting the perfect outfit. I chose an elegant navy blue dress that was sophisticated without being too formal, paired with pearl earrings that had been my mother's. Then I made an appointment at my usual salon to have my hair styled professionally. I wanted to look my absolute best for this special occasion. But the most important decision was selecting Dylan's gift. I wanted something meaningful, something that would show him how much I respected his ambitions and believed in his future success. After visiting several jewelry stores, I found the perfect present, a vintage Omega Seamaster watch, elegant and masculine, exactly the kind of timepiece a successful businessman should wear to important meetings and networking events. The watch cost me $3,000, but it felt worth every penny. I had it professionally engraved with, "To Dylan with appreciation, Marlene," and wrapped it in expensive paper with a handwritten card expressing how proud I was to have him as part of our family. On the evening of the dinner, Sarah picked me up from my house, but I immediately noticed she seemed unusually subdued during our drive to the restaurant. Her responses to my questions were brief, and she kept glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. When I asked if everything was all right, she forced a smile and claimed she was just tired from a difficult week at school. The Golden Oak is one of those upscale establishments with dim lighting, exposed brick walls, and an atmosphere designed to make every meal feel like a special occasion. When we arrived, I could see that Dylan had reserved a large table that could accommodate 12 people, and the setting looked absolutely beautiful, with fresh flowers and elegant place settings. However, as other guests began arriving, I realized that most of them were complete strangers to me. The group consisted primarily of Dylan's co-workers, from the start-up young professionals in their 20s and early 30s, who all seemed to know each other very well. They were energetic, confident, and spoke in a language filled with technical terms and business buzzwords that sometimes went over my head. Dylan greeted me with what I can only describe as enthusiastic, but somehow forced politeness. "Marlene, thanks so much for coming tonight." He gave me a quick hug, but his attention seemed to be divided, constantly scanning the room and making sure his other guests were comfortable. I noticed he seated me at one end of the table, physically separated from him and Sarah by 6 other people. As the evening progressed and conversations flowed around the table, I found myself increasingly isolated from the group dynamics. Everyone was discussing coding languages, venture capital funding, rounds, market disruption strategies, and something called scaling solutions that apparently required significant technical expertise to understand properly. When I attempted to contribute by mentioning some recent successful real estate transactions, I'd completed the conversation, quickly shifted back to technology and startup culture. I began feeling like an outsider, looking in a tourist visiting a world where I didn't speak the native language. During the main course, one of Dylan's colleagues, a young man with an expensive haircut and designer glasses, asked about the new house with obvious admiration. Dude, that place is absolutely incredible. How did you manage to afford such a beautiful property on a startup salary? The real estate market is totally crazy right now. Dylan's response made my stomach twist into knots. His answer was deliberately vague and misleading. We got really creative with our financing options, found some excellent investment opportunities, and leveraged some unique funding sources. The way he said it with a slight smirk and a knowing look toward his friends made it clear he was treating my loan like some clever business maneuver, rather than a family member helping them achieve their dreams. Another colleague laughed and said, "Man, I need to learn your secrets. My girlfriend and I have been saving for a down payment forever, but we're nowhere close to affording anything in that neighborhood." Dylan just smiled mysteriously and changed the subject as if he was some kind of financial genius who had figured out something the rest of them couldn't understand. The entire exchange made me feel invisible and used like I was just a convenient source of capital, rather than someone who cared about their happiness and success. When it finally came time for gift exchange, I proudly handed Dylan the elegantly wrapped box containing the Omega watch. The conversation around the table quieted as everyone focused their attention on the unwrapping process. I watched Dylan's face carefully, hoping to see genuine appreciation and gratitude in his expression. He lifted the watch from its velvet box and held it up for everyone to see. For a brief moment, I thought I detected real appreciation in his eyes, but then he spoke loudly enough for the entire table to hear. "Wow. Marlene, this is really expensive. Like really, really expensive." One of his friends immediately responded with obvious excitement. "Holy crap, dude, your mother-in-law is totally loaded. That's a serious piece of jewelry right there." Another person at the table laughed and added, "Man, I definitely need to find myself a wealthy mother-in-law like yours." "This is incredible." Dylan's response to these comments felt like a physical blow to my chest. Yeah, she's always been really generous with things we never actually asked for. The way he emphasized both generous and never asked for was unmistakably sarcastic and dismissive. This was the same man who had come to my house 6 months earlier with detailed presentations and market analysis, essentially begging me to loan him money for his house down payment. Now he was acting like my generosity was some kind of burden he had to endure, rather than a gift freely given out of love and support. After dinner, plates were cleared away and dessert had been served. Dylan stood up from his chair with a champagne glass in his hand. The restaurant's warm lighting created an intimate atmosphere, and all conversation at our table gradually died down as everyone turned their attention toward him expectfully. I felt a flutter of anticipation, genuinely curious about what heartfelt words he might share on his special birthday. He began in a completely conventional manner, thanking everyone for taking time out of their busy schedules to celebrate with him. He talked about what an incredible year it had been, mentioning several professional achievements at work, and expressing gratitude for the supportive friends who had become like family to him. He praised Sarah for being an amazing wife and partner, describing how her love and encouragement had helped him through challenging times. Then, with what seemed like perfect timing, he turned his attention directly toward me. "And I also want to give special thanks to Marlene," he said, raising his champagne glass in my direction while making eye contact. The entire table shifted their focus to me, and I felt a warm glow spreading through my chest, thinking he was finally going to acknowledge everything I had done to help them achieve their dreams. "She has taught us so much about patience and survival skills," Dylan continued, his voice carrying clearly across the table. A few people started chuckling softly, and I felt my first small twinge of unease. What exactly did he mean by survival skills? "Seriously, if any of you guys want to learn how to survive living with a demanding mother-in-law, just ask me," he said, his voice getting louder and more confident as he noticed people beginning to laugh. "I have totally mastered the art of smiling and nodding when you receive advice about absolutely everything, from how to cut your grass properly to how to manage your personal finances." The laughter around the table was becoming increasingly boisterous. Someone actually started clapping their hands together. I could feel heat rising in my face, but I managed to keep that polite smile plastered across my features, not quite believing what I was hearing from this man I had treated like my own son. But Dylan was just getting started. He was building momentum now, feeding off the energy and amusement of his audience. And thank God we have finally learned how to be truly independent and not have to depend on anyone else's money to feel successful in life, he declared, looking directly at me as he spoke these words. The irony was so thick, it was suffocating. This man was standing in an expensive restaurant he could only afford because of the house payments he wasn't making to me, wearing a $3,000 watch I had just given him as a gift, talking about financial independence. The entire table erupted in enthusiastic laughter and applause. Someone actually banged their fist on the table in appreciation. I heard one person say, "Oh my God, Dylan, you are absolutely terrible." But they were laughing hysterically as they said it, clearly enjoying every moment of my public humiliation. So here's to another year of surviving all the challenges that life throws at us, including overprotective mother-in-laws who always think they know what's best for everyone else. As the table cheered and clinked their glasses together in celebration, I sat there feeling like I had been physically slapped across the face. The blood was pounding in my ears so loudly I could barely hear anything else. But somehow I managed to stand up from my chair and join the applause with as much dignity as I could muster. "What a creative toast, Dylan. Happy birthday," I said, my voice steady, despite the emotional earthquake happening inside my chest. I endured exactly 10 more minutes of forced conversation before I made my excuse to leave. "I am so sorry, but I just remembered I have an extremely early appointment tomorrow morning," I announced to the table while gathering my purse and coat. Sarah immediately jumped up from her seat, looking panicked, but I waved her away with gentle firmness. "Please stay and enjoy the rest of the party, honey. This is Dylan's special night, and he should be surrounded by all his friends." As I walked toward the restaurant exit, I could hear the laughter and animated conversation resuming behind me, as if nothing significant had happened. In the parking lot, Sarah caught up with me, practically running in her high-heeled shoes and calling my name desperately. "Mom, please wait." "You have to understand, he was just joking around with his friends. You know how men get when they're together and they've had a few drinks." He absolutely did not mean anything malicious by what he said. I looked at my daughter, this wonderful woman I had raised to be kind and respectful and generous, standing there making excuses for her husband's calculated cruelty. "Honey, I understand exactly what happened in there tonight. I will call you tomorrow, and we can talk more then." I drove home through the quiet streets in a strange combination of numbness and crystalline clarity. The worst part of the entire experience wasn't even Dylan's words themselves, though they had been deliberately hurtful. What really devastated me was the gradual realization that this humiliation had been carefully planned and orchestrated. The seating arrangement that deliberately isolated me at the far end of the table, the group of friends who seemed to already understand what was coming based on their immediate enthusiastic response. The way Sarah had been nervous and withdrawn throughout the entire evening, like someone dreading an inevitable disaster. They had all been in on the joke except me. I spent that entire night staring at my bedroom ceiling, unable to sleep, replaying every single word of Dylan's toast and analyzing each burst of laughter from his friends. I found myself wondering how long they had been discussing me and mocking me behind my back during their private conversations. How many times had Dylan entertained his colleagues with stories about his demanding mother-in-law and her unwanted advice? But somewhere around 5 o'clock in the morning, something fundamental shifted inside my emotional landscape. I wasn't hurt anymore. I wasn't embarrassed or confused or questioning my own perceptions. I was resolved, determined, and completely clear about what needed to happen next. At exactly 8 o'clock that morning, I called David Martinez, the attorney who had handled my husband's estate and various real estate transactions over the years. David, I need to discuss collecting on a significant debt. No, there is no formal written contract, but I have extensive documentation of the transaction. David listened carefully as I explained the entire situation in detail. The bank transfers showing the $250,000 payment to Dylan and Sarah. The text messages where Dylan had promised to begin making regular monthly payments. The complete absence of any money returned over the past 6 months, despite repeated gentle inquiries about when payments might begin. Marlene, you have a very strong legal case here, David assured me after reviewing the facts. Even without a formal loan agreement, the electronic trail of communications and financial transfers creates a clear creditor-debtor relationship that any court would recognize. I can draft a demand letter requiring full payment within 30 days. Please do exactly that. While David worked on preparing the legal documentation, I spent the morning methodically organizing my evidence. Bank statements showing the original transfer. Screenshots of text messages where Dylan expressed gratitude for my investment in their future and promised prompt repayment. Even photographs from the house closing where Dylan had thanked me repeatedly for making their dreams possible. It was remarkable how much documentation existed of Dylan's appreciation and promises when he needed something from me versus his attitude now that he had what he wanted. Sarah called me around noon, her voice shaking with obvious anxiety and stress. Mom, about last night, I really think you misunderstood Dylan's sense of humor. He feels absolutely terrible that you left the party feeling upset. Does he feel terrible enough to offer a genuine apology? I asked directly. Well, he said he would apologize if you really want him to, but he honestly thinks you might be being a little overly sensitive about what was clearly meant as playful joking around. I see. So he is willing to give me a fake apology for my fake feelings about his fake humor. Mom, that is not what I meant at all. Honey, let me ask you something important. If one of your students at school made fun of another child in front of the entire class, what would you call that behavior? Sarah was quiet for a long moment before answering. I would call it bullying. And what would you do to address that situation? I would make sure there were appropriate consequences so the behavior did not happen again. Exactly. The first week after I delivered that demand letter to Dylan's office was characterized by an eerie silence that felt almost surreal. Dylan did not call, did not send any text messages, did not reach out through Sarah or any other family members. I strongly suspected he thought I was simply bluffing, that this was some kind of temporary emotional reaction that would blow over once I had time to calm down and think more rationally about the situation. Sarah, however, called me every single day, leaving increasingly desperate and emotional voicemails that I chose not to return. I needed her to understand that this was not some minor disagreement or temporary tantrum that would resolve itself with time and patience. This was a fundamental shift in how I was going to allow people to treat me going forward. Week 2 brought the first signs of genuine panic from Dylan's direction. He finally called me directly, and I could hear the stress and anxiety in his voice immediately when he spoke. Marlene, we really need to sit down and talk about this situation. I know you are upset about what happened at the restaurant, but you have to understand the position I am in right now. The startup is at an absolutely crucial stage in our development. We are about to close a major funding round with some very important investors, and I simply cannot liquidate that kind of cash right now without completely destroying everything I have been working to build. You should have considered those potential consequences before you decided to publicly humiliate me in front of your friends, I replied, keeping my voice calm and measured. Come on. It was one stupid joke that got out of hand. Everyone makes mistakes when they have had too much to drink. You have 15 more days to comply with the demand letter, Dylan. That same week, Sarah finally decided to confront me in person rather than leaving unanswered voicemails. She showed up at my house unannounced one evening, looking absolutely terrible. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, her hair was disheveled, and she appeared to have lost weight from stress. "Mom, you are completely destroying my marriage," she sobbed as soon as I opened the front door. "Honey, I am not destroying anything. Dylan created this situation entirely by himself. He made one stupid joke at a birthday party. You are completely and totally overreacting to something that was not even meant to be hurtful." I invited her inside and made coffee, the same way I had done hundreds of times when she was a teenager, dealing with friendship drama or school stress. But this conversation was going to be fundamentally different from those earlier heart-to-hearts. "Sarah, this was not just one isolated joke. This pattern of disrespectful behavior has been developing for months. The condescending comments, the way he talks about me to his friends, the complete lack of respect for the fact that I helped make his current lifestyle possible. He is under incredible pressure at work right now. The investors are making unreasonable demands. The entire team is stressed out and working impossible hours. He just said something thoughtless when he had been drinking and was trying to entertain his friends. And that gives him the right to mock me publicly, to act like my generosity is some kind of burden he has to endure." Sarah stared at me like I had transformed into a completely different person. "You are being vindictive and cruel. This is not the mother I know and love. The mother you knew was a doormat, Sarah. I am finally learning to stand up for myself and demand the respect I deserve." By week 3, Dylan was desperately calling in reinforcements from every possible direction. My brother Robert called me from Phoenix, clearly having been coached by Dylan about exactly what to say. "Marlene, I heard about this whole situation with your son-in-law. Don't you think you might be being just a little bit harsh here? The boy made a mistake, but at the end of the day, family is family, and we have to find ways to forgive each other. Robert, if your wife's brother publicly mocked and humiliated her the way Dylan mocked me, what would you expect her to do about it? Well, that would be different. We have been married for 30 years and have a completely different kind of relationship." Respect is not something you earn gradually through the passage of time, Robert. It is a basic requirement for any healthy relationship between human beings. Dylan's mother called from Colorado, trying to smooth everything over with grandmotherly charm and appeals to family unity. Several mutual friends reached out after hearing about the family conflict through social media, where Dylan had apparently posted something strategically vague about learning to navigate family challenges and growing through difficult situations. What I found most interesting was watching Dylan scramble frantically to find alternative sources of money. By day 15, he must have finally realized that I was completely serious about enforcing the 30-day deadline, because he started applying for every personal loan he could find. But his credit score was not strong enough to qualify for a $250,000 unsecured loan, and banks wanted collateral that he did not actually possess. The house was still partially in my name due to the original loan arrangement. Through our small town's social network, I started hearing reports that Dylan and Sarah's marriage was under serious strain. They had been seen arguing in public places, and Sarah had confided in several mutual friends that Dylan was dealing with some complicated family issues that were affecting his performance at work. Meanwhile, something remarkable was happening to me personally. For the first time in years, I felt completely in control of my own life and decisions. I was not making excuses for someone else's bad behavior. I was not minimizing my own feelings to maintain artificial peace, and I was not pretending that disrespect was somehow acceptable just because it came from a family member. Day 29 arrived with the most desperate and panicked phone call I have ever received from anyone. Dylan called at 11:15 at night, his voice shaking with barely controlled terror. "Marlene, please, I am literally begging you to reconsider this. I have tried absolutely everything I can think of. I cannot raise this amount of money in the time frame you have given me. The banks will not approve a loan this size without collateral, and I cannot use the house as security because of our existing arrangement." "Then you should have spent more time making payments instead of making jokes at my expense," I said, surprised by how completely calm and peaceful I sounded. "I will do absolutely anything to make this right. I will write a public apology on social media. I will work for you for free every weekend. I will sign whatever kind of formal contract you want for future payments, with interest and penalties." "Dylan, the only thing I want from you at this point is my money returned, and the basic respect you should have shown me from the very beginning." Day 30 arrived with a sense of crystalline clarity that surprised me. I woke up that morning feeling completely peaceful and serene. This was no longer about revenge or punishment. This was about teaching someone that actions have real consequences, and that some of life's most important lessons can only be learned through direct experience of those consequences. No phone call came by noon. No payment appeared in my bank account. At exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I received a desperate text message from Sarah. "Mom, please don't go through with this. We are going to lose absolutely everything." At 4 o'clock, I forwarded that text message to David Martinez with a simple instruction: "Please proceed with all legal action immediately." The lawsuit was filed that same afternoon. Within 2 hours, liens had been placed on Dylan and Sarah's house and Dylan's car. Bank account garnishment orders were submitted to their financial institutions, and Dylan's employer was officially notified about the wage garnishment requirements. Dylan's carefully constructed professional world began collapsing with shocking speed. His boss called him into an emergency meeting the following morning. Apparently, having active legal proceedings for $250,000 was completely incompatible with working at a startup that depended entirely on investor confidence and financial stability. Dylan was not fired immediately, but his position was demoted from full-time employee to part-time contractor, and his salary was reduced by 50% effective immediately. The startup's investors, who were already nervous about challenging market conditions, decided they could not risk having financially unstable team members in key positions. The funding round Dylan had been counting on to solve his problems was postponed indefinitely. Sarah appeared at my house that evening in a state of complete emotional breakdown. She could barely speak coherently through her tears and hyperventilation. "Mom, they are going to take our house. Dylan lost his promotion and most of his salary. None of his friends will even return his phone calls anymore. You have destroyed everything we worked for." "Honey, I did not destroy anything. I simply stopped enabling Dylan's disrespectful behavior toward me." "I hate you," she screamed at me the first time she had ever spoken those words in her entire life. "You have completely ruined my life and my marriage." She stormed out of my house, and I sat alone in my quiet living room, wondering briefly if I had pushed things too far. But then I remembered the look of smug satisfaction on Dylan's face during that birthday toast, the enthusiastic laughter of his friends, the way he had acted like my generosity was something to be mocked rather than appreciated. News of the lawsuit spread through our close-knit community with remarkable speed. Initially, people only knew that there was some kind of family drama involving a significant amount of money. But gradually, as more details emerged, the complete story became public knowledge. Dylan had publicly humiliated and mocked the woman who had loaned him $250,000 to purchase his house, and now she was demanding immediate repayment. Public opinion shifted dramatically once people understood exactly what had transpired. The women in my church group were universally supportive. "Good for you, Marlene. It is about time someone taught that young man some basic manners and respect." Even many of the men seemed to understand the fundamental principle at stake. You simply do not bite the hand that feeds you, especially not in public. Dylan's social circle evaporated almost overnight. These were mostly people in their 30s, many of them married with families, and their wives were absolutely horrified by Dylan's behavior. Several of his closest friends found themselves in serious trouble at home when their wives asked pointed questions about how they talked about their own mothers-in-law and family members. 6 months have passed since that unforgettable birthday dinner, and the entire landscape of our family relationships has been completely transformed. Dylan was forced to move back to Colorado to live with his parents for 3 months while he attempted to get back on his feet financially and emotionally. He eventually returned to our town and found work in construction, which represented a major step down from his previous tech career. But it was the only job he could secure that paid enough to begin making meaningful payments on the legal judgment. He sold his truck, his expensive watch collection, his gaming equipment, and everything else of value he owned to make a substantial partial payment and demonstrate good faith to the court system. The formal payment plan we eventually negotiated requires him to pay $50,000 per year until the entire debt is satisfied, including interest and legal fees. But the most significant change has been in Dylan himself as a person. The man who returned from Colorado after those 3 months was fundamentally different from the arrogant, disrespectful person who had made that cruel toast 6 months earlier. He had been humbled in a way that only genuine consequences and real hardship can achieve. 3 months ago, Dylan asked if he could meet with me privately to have an important conversation. We sat in my living room, the same room where he had once condescendingly explained cryptocurrency to me like I was a child, and he delivered what I believe was the first completely genuine apology of his adult life. Marlene, I need you to understand that I truly comprehend now what I did wrong. Not just what I said that night at the restaurant, but everything that led up to that moment. The way I spoke to you, the way I treated your generosity, like it was some kind of burden I had to endure, the way I made jokes about you behind your back to entertain my friends. I was completely wrong, and I am deeply ashamed of the person I was. Sarah and Dylan have been attending marriage counseling twice a week, working through the extensive damage that his behavior and its consequences caused to their relationship. Sarah has also been seeing an individual therapist to understand why she spent so many months making excuses for treatment that she would never accept in any other context. My relationship with Sarah is actually stronger now than it has ever been in her adult life. She visits me every Sunday afternoon, and we have conversations that are more honest and authentic than anything we shared before this crisis. She told me recently that watching me stand up for myself taught her something crucial about self-respect that she wants to carry forward into her own marriage and all her future relationships. I never want to become the kind of woman who makes excuses for someone who disrespects the people I love, she said last month. Watching you demand the respect you deserved made me realize I was becoming someone I did not like or respect. The ripple effects of this situation have extended far beyond our immediate family circle. I have been invited to speak at several women's support groups about setting healthy boundaries and maintaining financial independence. The story has become something of a local legend, and I regularly have women approach me in grocery stores and restaurants to share their own stories of family members who have taken advantage of their generosity and kindness. I have also started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, helping women understand that financial abuse is real and that they have legal options for protecting themselves. Many of the women there are surprised to learn that family members can sometimes be the most damaging financial predators precisely because we are socially conditioned to forgive them repeatedly. As for Dylan, he has become an unlikely advocate for treating in-laws and family members with genuine respect. Last month at Sarah's birthday dinner, he stood up to make a toast, and I held my breath, wondering what he might say. "I want to thank Marlene," he said, looking directly at me with complete sincerity. "She taught me one of the most valuable lessons of my adult life about respect, accountability, and the real meaning of family relationships." I am grateful every single day that she cared enough about me to demand better behavior instead of just enabling my worst instincts. When people ask me whether I have any regrets about how I handled this entire situation, my answer is always the same. I regret waiting so long to stand up for myself. I regret teaching my daughter that disrespect was somehow acceptable if it came from someone we loved. I regret allowing Dylan to believe that kindness was weakness and that generosity was something to be mocked rather than appreciated. But I do not regret the lawsuit. I do not regret the consequences. And I do not regret teaching a young man that words have real power and that with power comes responsibility. You know, people sometimes ask me whether I think I went too far with my response. Here is what I tell them. Respect is not a luxury item that you give when it is convenient. It is the foundation of every healthy relationship. You cannot build a marriage on disrespect. You cannot maintain friendships while mocking people behind their backs. And you certainly cannot borrow money from someone and then publicly humiliate them without expecting serious consequences. Dylan's toast cost him much more than money. It cost him his career, his social circle, his confidence, and very nearly his marriage. But in losing all of those things, he found something more valuable, genuine humility, and the understanding that every person deserves to be treated with basic human dignity. As for me, I found my voice. And once you find your voice, you never let anyone take it away again. Have you ever had to take a stand against a family member who was treating you with disrespect? How did you handle the situation, and what did you learn from the experience? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own experiences, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about setting boundaries and finding your inner strength. Please share this with someone who might need to hear that it is never too late to demand the respect you deserve. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth is not negotiable. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video.